Oak wilt, this is kind of a complicated disease, and it's something that there's a lot of misinformation out there about oak wilt. And it's something that we've dealt with in Michigan for a long time. Currently, the thought is that it's not native to the U.S., even though oak wilt is only known to occur in the United States. Scientists think that it's probably native to Central America, perhaps some of the cool, moist cloud forests in that part of the world, on some relatives of the oaks that we have in our part of the world, but no one really knows for sure. What we do know is that it's been in Michigan since at least the 1970s, probably before that. There's reports in the upper Midwest, like in Minnesota, Wisconsin, where it was first confirmed back in the 1940s, and even earlier than that, they were reporting symptoms. So it's been around quite a while, but the range has certainly expanded quite a bit. Right now we know it's in at least 56 of our counties, and it's pretty devastating to oak, but it's not something that is widespread as like Dutch elm disease or emerald ash borer. It's probably not going to kill all of our oaks, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that there isn't a super efficient vector that's moving it really quickly to a lot of other trees. So we tend to see these pockets of mortality like we have there, and it doesn't rapidly just move through everything. So that might be one of the good things, if you will, about oak wilt. So what is the concern really? Well, it kills red oak species in a matter of weeks, and in some situations you get really pricey real estate, high value trees that are killed, and that's a problem. It also kills a lot of timber trees. And if we ignore it and don't treat the oak wilt, it continues to expand throughout neighborhoods, throughout forest areas. You get more and more of the fungus, and as you get more of the fungus around, more potential for spread, and you get increasing risk throughout the state with people moving firewood. So if we treat the oak wilt, if we raise awareness of it and how to prevent it from spreading, and if we treat it in areas that are amenable to that, we can really protect a lot of our oak. And I'll talk just briefly about some of the things we do in a minute here, but we do a lot of trenching to contain oak wilt on our state land. There's also fungicide injections that can help slow the spread in ornamental settings as well. So if you go to the Michigan DNR Forest Health webpage, you get this oak wilt viewer. So we've got the website here, or you can even just Google Michigan DNR Forest Health. You get to the viewer, and the red dots here would show all of the confirmed oak wilt in the state. Doesn't mean that it isn't present in other locations, but it gives you a pretty good feel for where oak wilt is. You can zoom in and see where it's present in your part of the state. Yellow dots are where oak wilt is suspected. It's been reported but hasn't been confirmed. Blue dots are where we've done treatments to contain the oak wilt. So you can see we've got quite a large area of the UP and other areas of the state where we don't have oak wilt at this point, and the more awareness we have of the disease, the greater potential we have to keep these areas free of oak wilt. You can also click on this box here and get more information on the symptoms. There's a box when you first get to this website that you can use to make a report if oak wilt's suspected in another area, and then that has to be confirmed before it actually would show up as a red dot on this map. So I don't know if you guys have seen this this flow chart for oak wilt that we've put together, And I've got copies of it here. Maybe I'll just pass those around because I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the details of the disease, but kind of refer to this. And Meg in the back there actually put this flow chart together with input from us. But basically, what we're trying to do here is, with oak wilt, there's a lot of confusion between what is oak wilt and what isn't. And we're trying to kind of narrow it down so that when we're testing samples and getting confirmation, we're only doing that with trees that have a high potential to be oak wilt. And so I'll kind of go through some of this here. First of all, we get reports of oak wilt on a variety of species. Red oak species, the ones with pointy lobes, that'd be pin oak, northern red. Further south in Michigan, you might have black oak and some other species. But those are the trees that die really quickly from the disease. Bur oak is intermediate. It doesn't die as quickly, and white oaks tend to be fairly tolerant. You'll even have people report that white oak is immune to oak wilt. That's not the case. You can still get oak wilt, but it just dies more slowly. So I don't know how well you can see this picture from where you're sitting, but we've got a red oak with a lot of symptoms here. Leaves wilting, turning brown, dropping, and a bur oak, just a little bit of symptoms flagging at the top of the tree. And that tree's going to die much more slowly as a result of the infection. So red oak is where we tend to get the rapid spread and where most of our concern is. Symptoms would be present this time of year. They would start probably late June, 4th of July timeframe. You're going to start to see that. A lot of leaf drop from the top of the tree. And then, within a few weeks, that tree would be dead. The actual symptoms on the leaves, it can be kind of tricky sometimes. You don't always see these symptoms in the classic appearance, but typically you've got scorching or browning on the edge of the leaves, green down by the petiole, a lot of leaf drop. Sometimes people say it looks like fall in the middle of July under those trees. Patterns, again, you get these pockets of dying trees over time. So in this picture up here, there's some long dead trees, probably towards the center, and then you've got trees around that are just starting to die in any given year. So it moves fairly slowly. It doesn't move rapidly through a stand of oak trees or through a neighborhood, but each year you might see some additional trees dying around the edges. So here you've got a tree that died the previous year, 2 trees in the process of dying the next year, row of young pin oaks here. This tree is pretty close to death. The top of this tree is infected, and it's probably going to just continue to move down that line of pin oaks over the course of the next few years. Then, we get a lot of reports from the public of oak wilt, and we'll get pictures that look like this. Is it oak wilt or isn't it? And it's really hard to tell from those photos. We see a lot of what we just call oak decline in Missouri, which is not oak wilt and can be due to a variety of factors. Often it's drought and older oak trees. And usually late summer, this time of year, that's when we get a lot of those reports, particularly when we've had a drought. Northern Michigan last year, we got a lot of reports of oak decline. So why I think these might not be oak wilt? Well, this tree looks like it probably took a couple of years for it to die. The top died the first year. It's dying lower down the next year. Oak wilt on a red oak, probably going to die in just a few weeks in the summer. This tree's hanging on to all its leaves. That's more typical of oak decline. Oak wilt, they fall off. And again here, probably multiple years to death. So oak decline also is very dispersed across the landscape in an oak stand. I don't know how well you can see it from where you're sitting, but a lot of brown canopies all through that area. Oak wilt would be a discrete pocket where it's slowly moving outward. And golf course settings and yard trees, again, with oak decline issues, you tend to hang on to those dead leaves as opposed to what we see with oak wilt. Pretty obvious here. Sometimes it's not always this obvious, but you know, a lot of site disturbance here in the year or so before this tree died. Basically this little island for this poor tree in the middle of a parking area, which used to be a slope. Obvious over there too. So we get a lot of questions about oak wilt with situations like that. We have a guide to common oak diseases in the Midwest that can be pretty good. You know, just pass those around. I think that can be pretty handy. Some of those, you want to open that up? Some of the disease and insect issues in there are more common further south in Michigan than they would be in the UP, but a lot of those issues, that guide can be pretty helpful for. I guess I would encourage you, if you haven't had a lot of experience with oak wilt, to contact your forestry assistance program forester if you have one in your area as your first contact. We had a day-long training for them in the field looking at oak wilt earlier this year, so most of them have started to get a pretty good feel for it. We have a couple of ways that we confirm oak wilt, and it involves looking for the fungus under the bark of trees that died the previous year, we see up here, or sending samples to the lab. But you have to have the right sample. You can get kind of confused with other fungi and things under the bark, so it's really helpful if you've seen it a number of times before trying to confirm it. So those folks are probably a pretty good place to go, assuming most of you probably familiar with that program. And if you don't remember anything else about oak wilt, try to remember that wounding in the springtime is really a key thing. And that's how oak wilt gets spread to new locations further than roots that are grafted together. This time of the year, the insects are carrying the fungus and they're attracted to those wounds, and they've been known to come to these wounds within a few minutes after they're made. So coating those wounds with some sort of latex paint or tree wound dressing can be really important in areas where we've got oak wilt, and just avoiding those wounds in the first place is super important. So every year we have utility companies pruning along power lines and that sort of thing, and they're doing it when we have the oak wilt infection period, and you know, you come back later in the summer and you've just got oak wilt all along that power line. And we see a lot of issues with that, and that's probably one of the main ways that oak wilt has managed to spread so well around the state. And you know, if it wasn't for that, we'd have a lot less oak wilt. Let's see. Yeah, I guess just another message about firewood here, and just, you may already be aware of this, but a lot of these pests are moving around on the firewood, and it goes for oak wilt as well as the insects, and so keeping that local is pretty important. Any questions about oak wilt? Yes.
So I have a couple of things really quick. My first question is, I've heard a lot of variability in that no-cut period, be it based off of dates or based off temperature. And I was wondering what the best way to determine that still is. Because I've heard some folks say don't cut if it's above 45 degrees out, because that's when the beetles are active, as opposed to just that spring cooled off. So what is the variable that you guys think is most important?
Yeah, well, the Michigan State University is doing research on that. right now. And so far their research seems to be consistent with what we've generally used here in Michigan in the past, which is April 15th to July 15th. Depending on where you're at in the state, they may be able, when that research is done, even shrink that down a little bit to a shorter window. But they're just not seeing much evidence of infection potential outside of those dates. So later in the summer, the risk is pretty low. So we tend to go with that April 15th to July 15th time frame. And, you know, within that time frame, obviously, southern Michigan, the risk is going to be probably a little bit, you know, earlier in the spring as opposed to up here in the UP. But I think those are some pretty good dates to use. And in the next year or two, you know, we'll be able to confirm that and perhaps even shrink that down potentially to a shorter period.
But it is a temperature thing, because, you know, climate change is a thing that's happening.
Well, yeah, so, yeah, that's a good point. And, right, so it'd be based on temperature too. So they're looking at temperatures along with that infection period. And so if you get a really early spring with climate change or something, you know, maybe you have to move that back into March or something, potentially. But later in the summer, there's pretty low risk of infection.
And just to touch a little bit more on that, it's not the temperature that's outside, it is the degree days that we have. You know, it takes a while for those insects to get going. So if it's, you know, you have one early March day that's in the 70s, that's not going to just pop the beetles out right away. They have to have time to kind of develop and then emerge out. So you really need to look at those degree days. But like Simeon was saying, this is a pretty good time frame for oak wilt, and we have padded it by 2 weeks on either end to kind of account for an early spring or kind of a late spring that will go a little bit longer.
Yeah, so, you know, with the temperature on a given day, the insect may not be able to fly until it's warm enough, so that might be where there's confusion about a certain temperature. But
Yeah, I wasn't thinking like,
Yeah.
oh, it was 70 in March, so now it's ruined. Yeah, clearly
Yeah.
the degree days, but also we're seeing some major shifts in when seasons are happening. So,
and there's more than just the insect that goes into that, too. The fungus has to be producing spores that the insects pick up, and then the tree, just based on the physiology, the tree may even be more vulnerable to infection in the spring than it is later in the summer.
so it could shrink from the granite column. The stock's all screwed up from climate. Oh, nice. Now it's
Yeah.
a 2 week long thing.
Yeah, potentially, I suppose.
I'm not going to count on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on that. Yeah, oak wilt is an issue down in Texas and, you know, up as far north as the UP. So there's a lot of climate variation in there where you can still have oak wilt infections. Yes?
Has anyone looked into the genetics or reasoning why the white oaks are like more resistant?
Yeah, why the white oaks are more resistant, and a lot of it has to do with these structures that are produced in the vessels, the xylem vessels that move water through the tree. The white oaks have these things called tyloses, but basically it's a structure that ends up plugging that vessel and prevents the oak wilt fungus from continuing to move through the tree the way it does in the red oaks. It's also why like wine barrels are made out of white oak, not red oak, because the red oak it would just leak. So yeah, that's probably the biggest reason for that.